If you have a Bible with you this morning, I invite you to join me in the Gospel of Matthew. This morning, we're in the 9th chapter. If you need a Bible, there's some in the foyer, but Marco's not here. He had to go home early. He wasn't feeling well. But you can feel free to go grab Bibles in the foyer. If you need them, the text will also be on the screen behind me. But we're continuing this series that we started a few weeks ago on the healing narratives in the Gospel of Matthew that we've titled When Jesus Heals. And we've been discovering and exploring these different narratives and uncovering that indeed when Jesus performs these miracles, these healings, there's always more than what meets the eye. There's people are being restored to wholeness, not just physically, but their identity is being restored. Their shame is being taken away. Their place in society is being restored. Their ability to draw closer to God and to restore personal relationships are all being healed. And so we've been uncovering all of these different layers in these healing narratives and seeing how each of these reveals something new about the identity of Jesus. So this morning we're getting into a couple of more healings. We're picking up really right where we left off from last week. As you might have noticed, there are a lot of healings in the Gospel of Matthew. And so we're picking up in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 27. Hear the word of the Lord. As Jesus departed, two blind men followed him, crying out, "Show us mercy, Son of David." When he came into the house, the blind men approached him. And Jesus said to them, "Do you believe I can do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then Jesus touched their eyes and said, "It will happen for you just as you have believed." Their eyes were opened. Then Jesus sternly warned them, "Make sure nobody knows about this." But they went out and spread the word about him throughout that whole region. As they were leaving, people brought to him a man who was demon-possessed and unable to speak. When Jesus had thrown out the demon, the man who couldn't speak began to talk. The crowds were amazed and said, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "He throws out demons with the authority of the ruler of demons." Jesus traveled along all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, announcing the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were troubled and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The size of the harvest is bigger than you can imagine, but there are few workers. Therefore, plead with the Lord of the harvest to send out workers for his harvest." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. If you've been a Christian for very long, a real disciple of Jesus, following after Jesus, listening to his words, having his Spirit guide you, then you have probably experienced that sometimes he says things that are unexpected. Or worse yet, he'll ask you to do things that is unexpected. And as he's saying these things and doing these things and guiding you in your path, you might be scratching your head and going, "Jesus, well, what is going on here? This doesn't make sense. Why is this what you want me to do? Why is this your word for me?" And I know that there's plenty of times in my walk of faith over the years where God has spoken to me or has led me in some way, and I'm just like, "God, are you sure this is the plan?" You're doing things kind of odd here, and I'm not sure I get it. But he seems to know what he's doing because things always seem to work out the way he wants it to. But when I read especially this first healing narrative of Jesus healing these blind men, I get the sense when I read this of like, what's going on here? This is sort of a weird interaction to me. To give you a little bit of context, we looked at the story last week where Jesus healed this dead girl. Right? Her father was grieving, came to him, asked Jesus to come and touch her and bring her back to life. And so he goes to her house, kind of kicks everyone out, touches her hand, and the dead girl comes back to life. This is a remarkable miracle. And then Jesus is just going back home, essentially. He's going back to this house in Capernaum. And it's not his house. He didn't have a house in Capernaum. And it just says, as he's going back to the house. And this could be Matthew's house because that was the last house we saw him at in Matthew. But we also know he was at Peter's house a lot in Capernaum. That was a lot of times his base of operations in that region. And so he was walking back from that miracle, going back to the house, and then these two blind men hear him coming by. And again, they seem to know something about Jesus that gives them this confidence to request healing from him. And so they cry out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And then apparently Jesus just keeps walking. Like what you would expect Jesus to do is to stop, turn and address them, ask them what they want, and they have the whole interaction just right there, on the street. But that's not what happens. We get something, I think, rather unexpected. Jesus just keeps walking. And you get this scene where Jesus is walking back to his house, and these blind men are just following him, asking for mercy. And he's just keeps walking. And they keep following him until he gets to that house. And he goes inside, and then they follow him inside, right? And now, maybe somehow Jesus signaled to them to, follow him, but they're blind, so you can't just be like, "Hey, just come here." So I don't, it doesn't, Matthew doesn't give us any details on this, but it does seem a bit strange to me. And I have to ask, why does Jesus make the blind men follow him instead of just stopping and healing him there? There seems to be secrecy in this healing story. Jesus waits till they come inside the house, and even after the healing, he says he sternly warns them not to tell anyone. And within this secrecy, I think contains a sense of revolution. I don't think Jesus was testing their faith, seeing how far they would follow him blindly, literally. I don't think, it was any sort of test like that. I think his secret intent was in the spirit of the revolution that was beginning to happen in the world. The blind men referred to Jesus as the Son of David. "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And this is a title that we find a lot in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew uses it more than the other Gospels. It's a title that was associated with the Messiah. It had heavy messianic overtones. There was going to be this expected, new king coming from the line of David, a new son of David, a new Messiah who would restore Israel, who would restore the people of God and to establish God's eternal kingdom on earth. Right? This, of course, comes from King David, who was the greatest king in Israel, who united the kingdom of Israel. And then his son, who became the next king, was Solomon. And Solomon, was famed being the most, wise person to ever exist and ever will exist. And he expanded the kingdom, and it was sort of like the high point of Israel's history. Those were the good old days, the golden years of that age. But with Solomon also came a lot of sin, a lot of ways of doing things that were against what God had planned. And so as a result of Solomon and his sin and a lot of the kings that followed after him, Israel eventually came to their ultimate demise in exile. But there's this prophecy that a new son of David would emerge. This new son of David, this Messiah, would restore things to the way they were meant to be. And so they're calling out these blind men, no, this Jesus is not just a healer. They're not calling out, Jesus, healer, have mercy on us. Jesus, rabbi, Jesus, good teacher. Jesus, you're a nice guy, have mercy on us. No, Jesus, son of David. They sensed that Jesus was the Messiah. They knew it to some degree. Now, there have been other self-proclaimed messiahs, other self-proclaimed sons of David that have come, and they would arise up oftentimes with pomp and circumstance and large crowds and announcing that they are the Messiah, they are the long-awaited son of David. They will be the ones to solve everyone's problems. They will be the ones to make everything right again, and they just trust them. They'll solve all your problems. And so they come with all this pomp and circumstance and fame and being a celebrity, and it always ended badly. They could never fulfill their promises because they were never truly the Messiah, the Son of David. But Jesus did not come in the limelight. He came in the cover of darkness. He was born in a manger in Bethlehem, outside of the spotlight of Jerusalem. He was a refugee in Egypt for a number of years before he finally grew up in the small, no-name town of Nazareth, where people would say things like, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" No, he did not seek the light. He did not seek popularity and fame, but he worked in unexpected ways with humility, always trying to avoid the limelight, always trying to avoid becoming a celebrity, unlike these other messiahs who had come. And indeed, this is one of the temptations that Jesus faced in the wilderness. Before he began his ministry, he was baptized. The Spirit led him into the wilderness where he fasted 40 days, which kind of like how we're doing in the season of Lent. We're fasting, we're focusing on God, we're digging into his word. And then the devil came to Jesus in this time of fasting and gave him these temptations. And one of the temptations was this temptation to become spectacular. A temptation to be a well-known celebrity, to do amazing things. And so the devil took Jesus on the highest point of the temple. And he told Jesus, "You're the Son of God. Throw yourself off. God won't let anything happen to you. Angels will catch you if you jump off." Imagine what a spectacle that would have been. I mean, this is, in the temple in Jerusalem, the most populated area in Galilee. And just imagine, being there kind of in the courtyard of the temple and looking up, and there's a guy standing at the highest point of the temple. And of course, you're probably thinking, oh no, do we got a jumper? Like, what is going on here? And the whole crowd is watching this guy on the highest point, wondering what he's going to do. And then what everyone's afraid is going to happen, the guy jumps, and everyone gasps, right? But you can't turn your eyes away because it's like a train wreck. You have to see what's going to happen. And then angels swoop down and catch this guy and land him gently right in front of you in the courtyard. Wow. That would be incredible, right? The crowd goes wild. What more proof do you need that this is the Messiah? right? I mean, that's it. Case closed. This is him. But Jesus resisted this temptation to be spectacular. He resisted this temptation for this sort of fame and being a celebrity. Instead, he chooses to make himself known little by little, beginning on the outskirts of society, beginning in the margins, which, by the way, is where all the great world changers have began. And so just as he resisted the temptation in the wilderness, we find that he has to continue resisting this pull to become a celebrity throughout his ministry. Because that's not the point. Right? The point isn't to become famous. The point isn't to become popular or to have a huge following and be a celebrity. And in fact, those things, if they would have happened, actually would have gotten in the way. I mean, think about celebrities for a moment, right? Sometimes we love watching their work, and we have our favorite movies and shows and whatever, but let's face it, they don't live in the same world that we live in, right? They live in their $1 million mansions, multi-million, $100 million, whatever, in gated communities in Beverly Hills, miles away from anyone in actual need. Right? They live a different lifestyle. They live in a different world. They don't actually understand, many of them, the daily grind that many of us go through. And so we have magazines like Us and People, right? Where they follow them around and take pictures and write stories about them to remind the public these celebrities are just like us. These celebrities are people just like you and me, and to many ways they are. They're just people, right? But they don't get us, right? They're too far away. They're too isolated. They're not accessible. We can't go and hang out with them, right? There's a huge distance between us and those living in the world of the rich and famous. But Jesus didn't need a magazine to remind people he was one of them, because he was one of them. He grew up with them in Nazareth. He grew up poor and oppressed like everyone else. He grew up in the shadow of the Roman cross like everyone else. He grew up on the outskirts. He was with them, because he was one of them. And he couldn't have been the transformative and merciful presence that he was while living in a huge mansion in a gated community in Beverly Hills, miles away from anyone with an actual need. Which is why he resists this temptation to be spectacular. He's accessible because he's here. He's with us. Which is very much unlike the temple of that first century. When you went to the temple, there was different layers, different courts you could go to, depending on who you were. Right? If you were a Gentile, you had to be at the farthest. If you were a Jewish woman, you could go a little bit further. If you were a Jewish man, you could go further than that. Priests could go further. Of course, the high priest could go the farthest, but only sometimes. And so your access to God depended on who you were and where you ranked in this system. And then Jesus comes along and just throws all of that out of order. Jesus, the actual incarnate God, The one they call Emmanuel, God with us, is going around, and he was just that. He was just with us, everywhere, right where we were. And he was accessible. Anyone could just come up to him. The actual presence of God, you could just come up to him. It was so accessible that people just walked into his house. Which is so unlike the way that the systems have been set up in that day. And so what Jesus is doing here, just bringing the actual presence of God to everyone, this was revolutionary. This wasn't done before. The presence of God was in one place, the temple, the Holy of Holies, and you could get sort of close to it depending on who you were. And now Jesus is just unraveling all of this. And we know he's already stirred up trouble with the religious leaders, but if they actually knew what he was up to, if they really knew who Jesus was and what he was doing, they probably would have started trying to kill him much earlier. Which is why I think Jesus is doing some of these things secretly. We see him doing things publicly and openly, but then we get these times like, blind men, hey, you're calling me son of David. They're not ready for that yet. Right? Let's keep that down just between you and me. Let's go inside the house. He gives them the healing and sends them on the way, tells them, don't tell anyone about this. But, of course, you're blind. You just received sight, and you just met the most important person in the universe. Of course you're going to go tell your friends and family, right? So that they're out telling everyone what had just happened. And no sooner did they leave that more people are just walking into Jesus' house. This time, friends carrying a man who has been demon-possessed. And what's interesting about this story is that the actual healing gets very little attention. It's just like one short sentence. Right? Jesus healed him. The rest of the attention is on how people responded to this healing that Jesus did. Because I think what's the undercurrent of this healing of this demon-possessed man is this symbol that Jesus is beginning to undermine the powers of evil in this world. Jesus has been disrupting the religious status quo, the social status quo, and now much of this status quo has been in place to make sure that the rich and powerful feel good about their power and wealth, while people are suffering unjustly. Which is why it is the poor and the powerless, those unable to move forward in a corrupt and oppressive system, it is these who are able to see Jesus for who he is. Which is the irony of this passage, is that the blind men are able to see Jesus, and those who can see miss him completely. Because they get it. They're the ones who couldn't move forward in this corrupt system, and he is the one freeing them from that. The religious leaders, they were in it for themselves, but Jesus was in it for them. He's there for us. He's with us. And so when he casts out this demon, he's not just merely healing someone, he's undermining the evil systems and powers that keep the powerful powerful and the rich rich, who keep the oppressed oppressed and the poor poor. And so now, suddenly, you're getting the sense that this revolution is getting stronger. And people are sensing it. And as they're sensing this uprising, we get these two responses. Some people are like, wow, this is amazing. We haven't seen anything like this in Israel. This is something new. This is something, dare I say it, not even of this world. This is something from the kingdom of heaven. And then the other side, the Pharisees, hear this and they go, nah. They dismiss it all completely. They say, no, he's only casting out demons by the power of the demons. And interestingly enough, Jesus doesn't address that criticism here. He will a couple of chapters later. And so that doesn't make sense. A house can't stand divided and last. And so he addresses it later, but here he just kind of simply ignores this. But we have these two responses to the revolutionary nature of Jesus and his kingdom. Of accepting, wow, this is something new, this is something powerful, this is something revolutionary that is going to change the world. And then those who are in charge of the world saying, no. We don't want this change. We like our power, we like our wealth, we like our influence, so they just demonize Jesus. And these are still two responses we see today, and the responses that we are asked. How are we going to respond to the revolutionary work of Jesus? But the changes that he calls us to in our own lives, the changes he calls to us as a community, as a city, as a country, as in the world. How will we respond to this revolution? I think it's helpful to understand the nature of this revolution. We see just in the next passage in verse 35, it says that after these healings, Jesus was traveling among all the cities and the villages. He was teaching in their synagogues. He was announcing the good news of the kingdom, that the kingdom is here. He was healing every disease and every sickness. And I love this verse, in verse 36. Jesus saw the crowds, and he had compassion for them, because they were troubled and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He saw these people, living on the fringe, living on the outskirts, the oppressed, the poor, the marginalized, and he had compassion for them. This is a revolution of compassion. I think again back to Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. The last temptation, the devil took him to a high mountain, and he showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. And as Jesus was gazing upon all of that power and all of that wealth, that he could save the world because he would have all the kingdoms. All that glory that the world has to offer. And say, I'll give it all to you if you worship me. And Jesus wasn't interested. But then contrast that with what he sees here. He's not looking out about all the powerful nations on the world. He's looking out on a crowd of broken, hurting people. And he says, that's what I want. I want them. His compassion was for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then he tells his disciples, look at this harvest. This is only a little bit. The harvest is greater than you can imagine. The people in this world broken and hurting and in need of salvation, and not just, say a prayer and go to heaven salvation. Like they need restoration in their lives. And the relationship with God and the relationship with others and their health and their minds and their bodies and everything. Their harvest is so plentiful, and there are so few people to go out there and help them. Pray to the Lord, plead to the Lord that he would send out his workers into his harvest. And then we're not reading it, but the very next story, in the next chapter, Jesus raises up his disciples and he sends them out to do just that. And that's our invitation. We are the ones who receive the mercy and compassion of Jesus. But that transforms us then also to be workers of the harvest, to go out into a world, to those crowds that are broken and hurting and in need of something deep, and maybe they don't even know what that need is yet. And we are to be the people who go out and be the merciful presence of Jesus in their lives, to show them the restorative healing that only Jesus can provide. He calls us to join him in this revolution of compassion. And yeah, it shakes things up, but it makes everything better. May we respond to this call to be his workers and to spread his mercy and compassion to everywhere we go. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this revolution that Jesus started as he was bringing his kingdom into this world, and how he entrusted it to his disciples, who raised up other disciples, who raised up other disciples and other disciples and other disciples until, throughout the generations, until we have been raised up to continue carrying it on. May we be faithful to be your light, to look out upon the people and have your heart of love for them. To fulfill your desire for mercy and not sacrifice. For the knowledge of who you are over burnt offerings. May we be that presence in our world with your help and strength. In Jesus' name, amen.